the MSME market in India is actually a lot more significant than many of us realize. So that's the micro, small, and medium enterprises in India. So just to dimension this, if you looked at the entire Indian economy, we have about 81 million entities of various types. They contribute about 115 lakh crore of GDP. That excludes the bureaucracy and the defense spending. And they give employment to about 260 million people. Now, within that 81 million entities, if you took away the entities that are single unit entities, people operating out of temporary structures, you're left with about 27 million entities that we as Dun & Bradstreet call economically visible entities. Almost all of these 27 million are MSMEs. They contribute to approximately 40 lakh crore of GDP and about 65 million of employment. So that's approximately 1 in 3 rupees of GDP and 1 in 4 employment. Now, in all countries, as we look within our own database, the MSME sector or the equivalent of the MSME sector follows a very standard life cycle. They start with micro, they grow to small and medium, and then they become large. So if you look at a variety of countries around the world, take a look at the shape of how it follows in terms of the distribution. It follows something like this. But take a look at what India looks like. India is very strange. It's got a gigantic spike when it comes to number of MSMEs and very few large enterprises. In fact, the largest share are micro enterprises. So what holds them back? Why is it that micro enterprises can't make the journey to small and medium and then into large? Well, as Dun & Bradstreet, we just went and asked them. So for the last over 1 decade, we have been researching MSMEs and we've gone out and spoken with thousands of them. 4 consistent problems. They have raised these 4 problems over the years, over a decade. Right? And the 4 are, number 1, we don't have access to formal sources of funding. Secondly, we don't have access to talent. Thirdly, we don't have access to infrastructure. And 4, we don't have access to power. If we had to pick one and really go after it and solve it, what would it be? And the answer is, without a doubt, it would be, let's solve the problem of access to finance for these MSMEs. And why we say that is, as Dun & Bradstreet, we can look at the research that exists in India and outside in terms of to what extent do MSMEs in India have access to finance and how does that compare with similar entities in other economies. So take a look at this data. Indian MSMEs have access to finance to the extent of about 4% of them. And as you go from left to right on the chart, you'll see a whole bunch of countries that kind of look very similar to India, but consistently have more access to finance than Indian entities do. The credit quality of MSMEs, the risks associated with MSMEs tend to be higher than large enterprises. No doubt about that. But these problems are not unique. But in other countries, we found a way to get access to formal finance in a much higher share than we managed in India. Right? Now let's look at what happens to the 4% that do get access to finance. What is their marginal return to capital? Now what we've done is we've compared the marginal return on capital for the Indian entities with a lot of the entities that you just saw, and we've also added there, some other countries like the US, Sub-Saharan Africa. You've got India at 73% return to capital in terms of the marginal dollar that's lent, right? And compare that with many of the other countries. India is actually doing really, really well. Now, part of the problem, of course, is that 73% is owned by only a very small minority. What you see here is 3 groups of companies: large, small and medium, and micro. And this is all Indian entities. The height of the columns that you see is the return on capital employed, right? The blue column are the companies that do not have external borrowings, and the red column are those that do have external borrowing. And what you see is that as you go left to right, from large to micro enterprises, the difference between return on capital employed is tremendous between companies that have access to borrowing and companies that don't have access to borrowing. Companies that don't have access to borrowing are very, very low on profitability, particularly for micro enterprises. What's even more interesting is companies that do have access to borrowing return a roughly equal return on capital employed, whether it's micro, small, medium, or large. So bottom line is, this is a problem worth solving. It's a problem that is unique to India, and it's a problem that can be solved profitably. So take a look at this chart. What we see here is the dollar value of the share of micro and small firms in India in terms of the bank credit. Directionally, it's been going down over several decades. But that's not been in a vacuum of government policy. There have been subsequent governments that have tried to have policy enablers and tried to help this sector get access to bank credit. Hasn't really succeeded, and so more needs to be done by the government, by the finance system, by the regulators, and it is a problem that will give us rich dividends.